like it's a
Go ahead.
two-part problem, and your mission kind of addresses both. First of all, reframing the portrayal of the people at the bottom, the average citizens, working class, underclass people who are grossly misportrayed in the mainstream media. The flip side of that is exposing the people at the top who are totally insulated from any exposure whatsoever. I mean, and all the information you get about the CEOs and the corporate interests and the APAC and CPAC organizations, or the TPP. I mean, the only information we really have about the TPP is what's been leaked to WikiLeaks. They put out a $60,000 bounty, and someone turned the document over. So, and these are so exposing the people at the top, or exposing the corporate interests that are pulling the mayor's puppet strings. That's important. I don't know who those people are. I don't know who's in the Baltimore Development Corporation, but they have a huge amount of influence, and average people don't know that.
It's a part of the problem, but we sat with the gentlemen that run this union local I was talking about at public housing. I mean, they were schooling me on who does what to whom in Baltimore for 2 hours. They already know that. There's certain things that are hanging people up from being ready to get into action. And that's what we have to, we had a plumber here the other day who works here, and I was talking to him, and he's against raising the minimum wage. Why? He says, well, because they're just going to raise prices. Now, that's not a simple issue. It's not a simple issue, the answer to that. Right. And there's a lot of these kinds of things that are hanging people up. And that's part of what we need to do. We got to kind of get to what is the fact base of this stuff, and also get it to people in a way they can digest. We're running out of time here. Some more.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention a little pinprick of light that I think is important to keep covering, and that is the recent release of Marshall Eddie Conway after 44 years of incarceration. And the important thing now about his story is not the injustice that was done to him. He doesn't really want to talk about that. What he wants to talk about is the program he's doing to work in the community with teenagers so they will become responsible, autonomous, politically motivated citizens instead of, as he puts it, terrorizing their own neighborhoods. And Eddie witnessed the increasing youthification of our prison, and how prisoners are younger and younger. And he got inside their system. He talked to them for over 40 years. So he's in a great place. There's American Friends Service Committee is sponsoring some of his work. It's called Friends of a Friend. But that's a very important thing. He's got tremendous political consciousness. He's willing to talk, and I think his voice has to be heard. Thank you.
I'm interested in Mr. Glover's impressions of the kind of celebrity-driven media culture, especially around Venezuela lately. As you know, hundreds of millions of people are divorced from not only independent media, but also substantive corporate media. So they learn about Venezuela through an utterance by Jared Leto at the Oscars, or a tweet by Kevin Spacey. And I'm interested in your impressions on the depoliticized nature of this kind of celebrity-driven culture, and how many people learn about these kinds of very important events through this prism, and what your impressions are of that culture within the Hollywood kind of.
Well, certainly that form of celebrity-driven attention to Venezuela is shaped around money, and the attempt to demonize or to undermine the Bolivarian revolution that's happened there. That's gone on for some period of time. Either those who supported it in degree, its evolution and its movement, those who would support it, we were demonized for supporting it. People like Harry Belafonte and others who before, at 7, 8 years ago, were often demonized. So the counterattack, it seems to be, to get celebrities who often I don't know what their relationship with Venezuela has been in the past, and if they followed the movement of what is happening in Venezuela at some particular point. But this particular opportunity, if you can attack, i.e. that dictator, i.e. Chavez, then certainly you now begin to attack someone who is basically, he doesn't have the same kind of charisma and everything else, but it's an attempt to reverse. And at this particular moment, you know, we had a coup in 2002. It was very little support came from those who were opposed to the coup. There wasn't a celebrity buildup for the coup itself. In fact, it was the people of Venezuela who translated their own aspirations and brought back their president. So we have this very veiled attempt. I don't know Jared Leto. We did a film together 20 years ago, whatever, but I don't know him. But I think in the sense that there's a great deal of money believing that they can seize this particular moment and seize the confusion right now to subvert the whole question about this. And this has always been done with the Cuban experience, you know. This has been done. So what they've effectively done now over this period of time is begin to marshal together and gain their allies at this push. They can't win and have not, let's say can't, they have not been able to win at the ballot box, period.
Right.
No matter whatever it said, we have one of the great presidents, one president here, who's basically said that this election process is the best election process that he's seen.
In the world.
And I'm in the world, and that includes our own election
Talking
process.
to Jimmy Carter.
Huh?
You're talking about Jimmy Carter.
Yeah.
Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter. I'm sorry. Was it Jim? Let me explain that. Jimmy Carter. Whenever you have somebody who wants you to be clarifying with it, Jimmy Carter said that in a sense. And yet, at the same time, we have, one, the shortages that have occurred, the kind of attempts to destabilize the government, the cash or the inflation, all those particular things. You've had systematically people attacking this government all along, whatever the policies are, whatever the financial policies are, whatever the policies in terms of providing and using the resources, oil, which the people control, and pushing those resources and providing those resources to people for issues around education, healthcare, et cetera. There's always been this. And I think that certainly there's a space that we operate in as celebrities, because you know, you win an Oscar, you're gonna have a podium, you know, you're gonna have a platform to talk for some time, and everything else. And it's unfortunate that we didn't have that. I remember when Susan Sarandon won an Oscar, the first thing she talked about was Haiti in her speech. And what happened to her? People thought she was politicizing the moment, in a sense. She talked about what was happening in Haiti, the coup that had happened in Haiti and all those particular things. So it's the choice that the media wants to embrace, right, the ideas around Jared Leto. And look here, he could have called any one of a number of people, including the Venezuelan embassy or other voices in the community, other voices in Venezuela, to talk about what is happening there. He chose not to do that. So he has specific people that he wanted to talk to in relationship to this, you know. But the facts don't lie. The fact that you've had a process in place, the fact that things are changing in people's lives, and all you have to do is go to the places like I call Barlovento or the youth collective that we went to, and you can see the dynamic aspects of what is happening there, the kind of space this is open for people that's happening there, and the public, and it's a democratic space.
Let me just add one point as we're talking about where to go with media and whose side media is on. And we have to learn to deal with complexity.
Yeah.
We are a society, perhaps in the globe, but certainly in this country, it's either A or it's B. You know, I struggle with my 35-year-old son about, he probably got that idealism from me, but no, Daddy, this is the right side and that is the wrong side. We know life is never so complex. What am I getting at? The Venezuelan government, which has been democratically elected, must deal with the issue of social violence. I'm not talking about now protest. I'm talking that preceded protests. It has a very high index of social violence. It was there before this government came in, but this government is in. For those of us who were 1960s fans and, like me, still a fan of the Cuban Revolution, we did not want to talk about the issue of race because that was feeding the opposition of attacking Cuba. But if you don't look at the complexities in your own house, the fracture lines in your own house, then you are not going to be able to tell a convincing story on the outside and get people to deal with that. So that this government does have a responsibility to deal with inflation, which is also being manipulated in the international market. It is not a simple internal issue.
Yeah.
But some of the social violence that is going on that has nothing to do with protests, those are internal kinds of situations. And we can hold people accountable for that while we are supportive of them. But we should not hide the contradictions or the limitations or the failures because then we're just reproducing what the other side has always reproduced. And that's something that I think the real news, I know whenever I'm talking about, he pushes me on my ideological questions. That's an ideological answer. That is not a statistically fact-based answer you just gave me. I understand your ideology and I support it and appreciate it, but let's get down to what the specifics are here. And that's something that we, the public, have got to demand by doing it ourselves.
Well, you know, I was in Brazil at the time that there was a protest. And the people in Brazil, people were concerned with truck drivers were blocking the roads and causing a great deal of congestion and everything else. People in Brazil were concerned about, is this a repeat of Chile in 1973? So on the one hand, but also the fact that the officials got together and said, straight up, we have some real issues here that we have to deal with, you know, is that we can't explain away what is happening. There's a course of action that we have to take on, given the choices that we made. The choices to put a great deal of money into the World Cup and the Olympic Games, building out and everything. The choices that went with the defunding or this cutting funding in public transportation. All of the questions that we enacted that. We have to take responsibility for that, and we have to address people's aspirations and certainly their voice in terms of that as well. So that becomes certainly a part of this process. You know, certainly we've questioned why, and I'm going to say all of us question why haven't the Venezuelans been able to deal with the social violence there? What do we have to put in place? If there's a process of transformation and resocialization, how do you deal with the issues of violence in there? And you can't just brush them off. And that's the question, you know, what are those things how those things are prioritized, you know? What kind of structures and what kind of government structures are in place, you know, to build the kind of capacity to deal with those particular issues? Where's the dialogue within the community that's happening? Now, certainly, we may say that those social violence are now being overshadowed by the other things that are happening at the particular point in time, but they are real things that affect people's real life. When they dealt with the issue of talking about literacy, they formed a project that talked about literacy. When they dealt with the issue of talking about health care and making health care accessible to people in the barrios and other places where it had been inaccessible, they began to put together projects to do that and set that apart, you know. And they may have gotten resistance from that, but they continued on the line to deal with those particular issues.
Okay, now it's after 4, and I know these guys got to get to the airport, but I promised you a question before we wrap up.
Thank you. My question is specifically from Mr. Glover. I know with Garan Olson's upcoming movie concerning violence, that seems to be kind of one of the themes that sometimes just talking about it. I mean, in Venezuela, when the majority of people talk about things get done. But in this country, it seems we talk about things but are ignored. And I'm wondering if there is a time for violence when nothing is going the people's way. I mean, is there a time for revolution instead of just talking at busboys and poets and democracy now?
Well, wait. One of the things is talk about, and there's a movie that we produce. First of all, let me explain the movie shortly. It's a movie that we produce along with Johan Olsson, our producing partner from Sweden, and it's a collaboration again. We did a movie called, we did a movie called a Black Power Mixtape. I don't know if people saw that movie or not. We saw the movie called Black Power Mixtape with archives of Swedish television. We did the same movie looking at Frans Fanon's Wretched of the Earth, using that as the framework. Look at Frans Fanon's Wretched of the Earth. Let's get that right. Frans Fanon talked about revolution and transformation and explained through his own work as a psychiatrist how that manifests itself in the colonial process. That's what he talked about, essentially. Now, we may want to extrapolate on that and find other kind of ways in which we see that in the context we see that today. That's what we did. So we took the three wars with with material that had not been before in the 70s, the war in Mozambique, the war in Zimbabwe, the war in Angola, and had rare footage that had only been shown at all once on Swedish television. We took that and compiled a piece of work using the narration and reading of Fanon by Lauryn Hill. Took that and did a documentary on that concerning violence. So it's been something that's been embraced incredibly, but we begin to shape that. So we want to find out the context, the historical context. We have to understand that the book was written and the historical context within the application of given Portuguese and colonialism. But we understand, but we have to go back to Gandhi. An eye leaves all of us blind. You know, a king, or whoever we want to go to, great thinkers who, in the sense that do we explain the situation of violence and talk about it? Is it ever justified?
Right. And on the case of Latin America, which is the most dynamic region of the world, if you measure it by the dominance of the neoliberal paradigm all over the world, and what I mean by the neoliberal paradigm is deregulation, privatization, lower role of the state mechanisms in the welfare of the people, and elected officials being the handmaiden of corporate interests, less the handmaidens of the interests, and I hope that's not a chauvinist term, in the handmaiden of the people. That happens inside this country, and this country also exports it to the rest of the world. The new community of Latin American and Caribbean nations, and we have someone in the audience from the Institute of the Black World 21st Century who will also have some affiliate status in terms of space here, and Don Rojas, who has just come back from the meeting in St. Vincent of the Caribbean countries. The Caribbean countries and Latin America, all 33 countries, at their recent meeting in Havana, Cuba, about 2 months ago, the first and major declaration that they put forward is that this is a zone of peace. The second declaration, non-interference in the internal affairs of the sovereignty and self-determination expressed by the citizens of a nation. The third declaration, we respect, although we may individually disagree, we respect the right of each citizenry to decide on its own economic and political project. Why did they come up with that? Because if you look at the history of the struggle against colonialism in the late 50s and into the 60s, and you go to places like Angola and Mozambique, what did war produce? The people won political power, and there was no economic base. They took out the copper pipes. They took out all of the infrastructure. Millions of people were killed. And so the idea is, what kind of new humanistic weapons, if you will, can be used to fight your opposition? And this is where Hugo Chavez was very, very clear. He said that these 21st century projects must be democratic. He loved Cuba. He loved the Cuban Revolution. One would have thought he came from the loins of Fidel Castro, how close they were. But he was saying that model, for all of its virtues of the 20th century, is not a workable model at any level of scale in the 21st century. And I think we have to understand power in new and different ways. I'm not a pacifist, but I have come to have much, much more respect in trying to understand the depth of power in what those Quakers were saying. They were saying maybe through rational, deep humanistic expression, we can bring the controllers of power to a more human point of view. We are at another point in human history, and I think we have to examine how do we understand power at this moment, and not let the passion of an eye for an eye be what drives us.
So this is just the beginning of a discussion. I hope our guests will come back. We will have other guests. But we're going to be discussing this in a more deeper and richer way. We're going to ask people like our public sector union guys to come and speak. We're going to ask people like the young activists working with the incinerator, fighting the incinerator project, to come and speak. This is a process. It's just beginning, and I thank you all for being part of it. And thank you at home for joining us on the Real News Network, Town Hall from Baltimore.